The Stellar Alliance flagship, luminous Aegis, drifted at the edge of the Axton star system, its gleaming hull reflecting the distant red glow of the dying sun. Colonel Saren stood at the command bridge viewport, her slender fingers pressed against the transparent aluminum as she observed the chaotic spectacle unfolding around Sentinel Prime. The once thriving colony world was now enveloped in a writhing mass of biological matter, tendrils of pulsing tissue stretching from the surface into orbit, forming what Alliance scientists had dubbed the biological labyrinth. 6 months into the Extinction War, and already half the outer rim had fallen. Saren's mandibles clicked in agitation, a nervous habit she'd developed since taking command of the relief force. The Sentinel Prime Guardian Fleet, once the pride of this sector, had been reduced to a scattered collection of damaged vessels, desperately trying to maintain a defensive perimeter around what remained of the planet's habitable zones. "Colonel," Lieutenant Mira's voice came from behind her, the young officer's bioluminescent skin pulsing with anxiety as she approached. "We've received an emergency transmission from Admiral Vex of the Guardian Fleet." Saren turned, her 4 eyes narrowing. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the haggard face of Admiral Vex. His typically immaculate exoskeleton was cracked in several places, and one of his sensory stalks hung limply beside his head. "Colonel Saren," Vex's voice crackled through the transmission. "The biological labyrinth has breached our inner defensive line. We're losing ground by the hour. Request immediate reinforcements. I repeat, immediate reinforcements or Sentinel Prime falls." Before Saren could respond, the transmission cut out, replaced by static. She turned to her communications officer. "Try to re-establish contact." "Impossible, Colonel. The labyrinth is jamming all frequencies from the surface." Saren's mandibles clicked rapidly. This was precisely the scenario the Alliance Council had feared. Sentinel Prime was the keystone of the Axton system's defenses. If it fell, the entire sector would be vulnerable. "Colonel," Lieutenant Mira approached cautiously, holding a datapad. "The Council has sent new directives regarding the defense of Sentinel Prime." Saren took the pad, her eyes scanning the contents. With each line, her posture stiffened further. "They can't be serious," she muttered. "The Special Integration Unit? They're barely Alliance members." "The Council was quite explicit, Colonel," Mira replied. "They believe the situation calls for unconventional solutions." Saren handed the pad back to Mira, her expression unreadable. "Send the call. Inform Captain Kale that his services are required by the Alliance." Mira hesitated. "Colonel, are you certain? The Deathworlders—" "The Council has made its decision, Lieutenant," Saren cut her off. "And we are bound by duty to obey. Send the call." As Mira departed to carry out her orders, Saren returned her gaze to the viewport. The biological labyrinth pulsed around Sentinel Prime like a monstrous heart, tendrils expanding and contracting in an obscene parody of life. After a moment of contemplation, she activated her personal comm unit. "Dr. Voss to the command bridge," she ordered. "We need to prepare for the arrival of our reinforcements." 20 standard hours later, the sensor officer's voice cut through the tense silence of the command bridge. "Unidentified vessel approaching. Colonel, it doesn't match any Alliance registry." Saren straightened in her command chair. On screen, the main display activated, revealing what could only generously be called a spacecraft. The vessel was a patchwork of metal plating, exposed structural elements, and what appeared to be improvised weapon systems bolted onto every available surface. It bore the scars of countless battles, its hull blackened and dented in numerous places. "That's their warship," Lieutenant Mira couldn't contain her surprise. "That," came a cultured voice from the science station, "is what happens when you give tool-making capabilities to beings from a Class 12 death world." Dr. Voss approached the viewport, his 8 limbs moving in the precise, measured manner typical of his species. The chief xenobiologist had made his opposition to involving the Deathworlders well known, but Saren had overruled him. Now, his compound eyes studied the approaching vessel with scientific detachment. "Primitive by our standards," Voss continued, "but remarkably effective for their technological level. Note the overlapping armor plates, designed to ablate rather than deflect energy weapons. And those protrusions are almost certainly nuclear-tipped missiles. Barbaric, but undeniably potent." "Open a communication channel," Saren ordered. The view screen shifted to show the interior of the Deathworlder vessel. Unlike the sleek, ergonomic design of Alliance ships, their command center was utilitarian to the point of crudeness. Exposed wiring hung from the ceiling, and the lighting flickered intermittently. In the center of the screen stood a being that caused several bridge officers to instinctively recoil. Captain Kale was tall by Alliance standards, his frame covered not with a proper exoskeleton, but with soft, vulnerable-looking skin. His two eyes, only two, were set in a flat face, dominated by a protruding nasal structure. Most disturbing was the absence of protective carapace or sensory appendages, leaving his vital organs seemingly unprotected. "Colonel Saren." Kale's voice was deep and resonant, jarringly loud in the quiet of the bridge. "Task Force Thermopylae reporting as ordered. We received your distress call." Saren's mandibles clicked once before she composed herself. "Captain Kale, the Alliance appreciates your prompt response. The situation on Sentinel Prime is critical." Kale nodded, the gesture alien and abrupt. "We've reviewed your tactical data. The biological labyrinth has established a foothold in the Northern Hemisphere and is spreading rapidly. Your conventional forces have been ineffective at containing it." "That is correct," Saren acknowledged, ignoring Dr. Voss's subtle hiss of disapproval. "The labyrinth adapts to our tactics faster than we can develop new ones. It's as if it can predict our movements." "Biological intelligence," Kale replied, his flat face showing no emotion that Saren could interpret. "It learns. We've seen similar patterns on our homeworld." "Your homeworld?" Dr. Voss interjected, stepping into view of the communication array. "You've encountered something like the labyrinth before?" Kale's mouth curved upward in what Saren recognized as a human smile, though it contained no warmth. "Doctor, on Earth, we call Tuesday what you call apocalypse. My species evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We're still here. The planet is still there too, but it knows who's in charge now." Silence fell over the bridge as the Alliance officers processed this statement. Saren was the first to recover. "Captain, we've prepared a tactical briefing. My officers will transmit it to your vessel immediately. We plan to deploy a combined force to the shattered moon of Sentinel Prime, where Alliance survivors have established a temporary base. The labyrinth has begun to extend tendrils there as well." "Unnecessary," Kale replied. "My team is already prepped for deployment. We'll handle the moon operation." "Alone," Lieutenant Mira blurted out, then looked embarrassed at her outburst. Kale's expression didn't change. "We work better alone. Your species aren't adapted to our combat methods, and we don't have time for you to learn. Transmit the coordinates. We drop in 30 minutes." The communication ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. "Colonel," Dr. Voss said quietly, "I must register my formal objection to allowing these creatures to operate independently. They're barely civilized. They still use projectile weapons and nuclear devices. We know nothing about their tactical doctrine or capabilities." Saren turned to face the scientist. "Your objection is noted, Doctor. But the Council has been clear. We are to provide all necessary support to the Deathworlders. They believe Captain Kale's team may possess capabilities we lack." "What capabilities could primitive mammals possibly—" "Doctor," Saren cut him off, her voice hardening. "The Alliance has lost 5 major colony worlds in 6 months. Our most advanced bioweapons and defensive technologies have proven ineffective against the labyrinth. At this point, I am willing to try anything, even if it means working with beings from a Class 12 death world. She turned to Lieutenant Mira. Prepare a response team. I want our best combat medics and xenobiologists ready to deploy as soon as the Deathworlders secure the moon base. And Lieutenant, her voice softened slightly. Tell them to be prepared for anything. The shattered moon of Sentinel Prime had once been a thriving mining colony, its surface dotted with habitation domes and processing facilities. Now, most of those structures lay in ruins, crushed by falling debris when the labyrinth's first attack had fractured the moon's crust. The few surviving domes had been converted into a makeshift military outpost, where the remnants of the Guardian Fleet's ground forces had taken shelter. Colonel Saren's shuttle touched down on a hastily cleared landing pad, the vessel's engines kicking up clouds of gray dust. She emerged flanked by Dr. Voss and a team of elite Alliance commandos, their environmental suits protecting them from the moon's toxic atmosphere. The scene that greeted them was one of organized chaos. Alliance soldiers moved with purpose among the ruins, carrying supplies and wounded comrades. But what drew Saren's attention was the group of figures standing at the center of the landing zone, surrounded by what appeared to be corpses. As Saren approached, she realized the bodies on the ground were not Alliance personnel, but components of the biological labyrinth, tendrils, nodes, and what appeared to be specialized combat forms, all oozing a viscous purple fluid. Captain Kale stood among his team, a group of 12 humans of varying sizes and appearances. Unlike the Alliance forces, they wore what looked like primitive mechanical exoskeletons rather than proper environmental suits. Each carried an assortment of archaic-looking weapons, projectile rifles, bladed implements, and what appeared to be explosive devices. Most shocking was their appearance. Several were bleeding from minor wounds, their red blood staining their equipment. Yet they seemed utterly unconcerned by their injuries. Colonel, Kale acknowledged her approach with a nod. We've secured the perimeter. The labyrinth had established 7 major nodes on this side of the moon. All have been neutralized. 7? Dr. Voss stepped forward, his environmental suit's sensors extended. Our scans only detected 3. Your scans were incomplete, one of the other humans replied, a female with her hair bound tightly against her skull. The labyrinth burrows. What you see on the surface is maybe 30% of its mass. Impossible, Voss protested. Our sensors can penetrate up to 2 kilometers of solid rock. And the labyrinth knows that, Kale said simply. So it digs deeper. Before Voss could respond, a commotion erupted near one of the habitat domes. Alliance medics were rushing toward a soldier who had collapsed, his environmental suit bulging oddly at the abdomen. Contamination! One of the medics shouted. He's been infected! Dr. Voss immediately moved toward the fallen soldier, his medical equipment at the ready, but Kale's hand shot out with surprising speed, blocking his path. Stay back, the human captain ordered. Your medicine can't help him now. Don't be absurd, Voss snapped. I am the leading xenobiologist in the Alliance. If anyone can treat a labyrinth infection, it's me. Kale ignored him, turning instead to one of his team. Harrison, containment protocol. A burly human male nodded and approached the convulsing soldier. Before anyone could react, he had drawn a wicked-looking blade and plunged it into the bulging section of the environmental suit. Purple fluid, mixed with blue Alliance blood, sprayed across the landing pad as the soldier screamed in agony. What are you doing? Saren demanded, her mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. That's an Alliance soldier. Saving his life, Kale replied calmly, as Harrison worked with methodical precision, cutting away a writhing mass of biological material from the soldier's abdomen. The labyrinth spore was attempting to bond with his central nervous system. Once that happens, conversion is irreversible. Dr. Voss pushed past Kale and scanned the excised mass with his equipment. His posture shifted from outrage to scientific fascination. Remarkable, he murmured. The spore was adapting to a specific physiology in real time. I've never seen the labyrinth exhibit this level of targeted infection before. It's evolving, Kale stated flatly. Learning. Each encounter teaches it how to more effectively combat new species. It's why your conventional tactics are failing. Saren watched as Alliance medics took over from Harrison, stabilizing the wounded soldier. Despite the brutality of the humans' approach, the soldier would live, something that would not have been possible had the infection progressed further. "You've encountered this specific type of biological warfare before?" she asked Kale, reassessing her initial impressions of the Deathworlders. "Not exactly the same, but similar enough," Kale replied. "Earth has produced countless pathogens and parasites that attempt to hijack host organisms. Our history is a continuous arms race between our immune systems and evolving threats. It's why we survived long enough to develop civilization." A sudden explosion from the far side of the outpost interrupted their conversation. Saren's communicator immediately lit up with urgent transmissions. "Colonel!" Lieutenant Mira's voice came through clearly. "The Labyrinth is launching a coordinated attack on the eastern perimeter. Our defenses are being overwhelmed. All Alliance personnel, fall back to secondary positions," Saren ordered immediately. "Establish a defensive line around the central habitat dome." To her surprise, Kale and his team were moving not toward the central dome, but toward the source of the attack. "Captain!" she called after him. "Where are you going?" Kale paused briefly. "To kill it, Colonel. That's why you called us, isn't it?" Without waiting for a response, the humans charged toward the perimeter breach, their primitive weapons at the ready. Saren found herself following, curiosity overriding her better judgment. Dr. Voss fell into step beside her, his scientific interest evidently piqued as well. What they witnessed at the eastern perimeter defied conventional Alliance military doctrine. The Deathworlders didn't establish defensive positions or attempt to coordinate their fire. Instead, they scattered, each engaging the labyrinth independently, exploiting the biological construct's inability to track multiple fast-moving targets simultaneously. The labyrinth had sent a wave of combat forms, quadrupedal creatures with razor-sharp appendages and acidic spittle. Alliance soldiers had fallen back, their energy weapons proving ineffective against the creatures' rapidly adapting armor. But the humans' primitive projectile weapons tore through the biological constructs with brutal efficiency. The high-velocity rounds caused catastrophic damage that the labyrinth couldn't adapt to quickly enough. Where the creatures did adapt, developing thicker armor or redundant systems, the humans simply switched tactics, using explosive rounds, incendiary devices, or even their bladed weapons to find new vulnerabilities. Most shocking to Saren was the humans' apparent disregard for their own safety. They sustained injuries that would have incapacitated Alliance soldiers, yet continued fighting with undiminished ferocity. One female human had her arm slashed open by a creature's talon, exposing muscle and bone. Yet she merely switched her weapon to her other hand and continued fighting, her face showing no sign of pain. "How are they still functioning with those injuries?" Saren asked Dr. Voss, who was recording the battle with his scientific equipment. "Adrenaline," Voss replied, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "Their bodies produce chemicals that temporarily block pain and enhance physical performance under stress. Combined with their naturally robust physiology, evolved to withstand conditions on a Class 12 death world. They can continue functioning despite injuries that would be fatal to most Alliance species." The battle was over in minutes. The labyrinth combat forms lay in twitching heaps, purple fluid pooling beneath their shattered bodies. The humans regrouped, administering rudimentary first aid to each other with the casual efficiency of those long accustomed to battlefield medicine. Kale approached Saren, his primitive exoskeleton splattered with biological fluids. "The perimeter is secure for now, but this was just a probing attack. The labyrinth is testing our defenses, learning our capabilities. Then we need to strike before it can adapt," Saren replied, coming to a decision. Captain, I want your assessment. Can Sentinel Prime be saved? Kale's expression grew grim. No. The primary infestation is too deeply entrenched. But we can kill it. Prevent it from spreading further. How? Our most powerful weapons have barely slowed its expansion. You've been fighting the symptoms, not the disease, Kyle explained. The labyrinth is a distributed organism, but it must have a central control node, a brain. Find it, destroy it, and the rest will die. Dr. Voss stepped forward. We've theorized about a central intelligence, but our scans haven't been able to locate it. The biological mass is too dense, too chaotic in its organization. That's because you're looking for something that resembles your understanding of intelligence, Kale replied. The labyrinth doesn't think like you do. Its consciousness is alien, distributed, but still centralized. We need to look for patterns of energy and chemical distribution within the mass. Saren studied the human captain with new respect. You sound more knowledgeable about xenobiology than I would have expected, Captain. Kale's mouth formed that unsettling smile again. On Earth, understanding biology is a survival skill. Colonel, now, we need access to your sensor data and any tissue samples you've collected from the labyrinth. My team's xenobiologist can help identify the control node. Your team has a xenobiologist? Dr. Voss asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Dr. Chen Lewis. Kale indicated a slight human female who was currently extracting a sample from one of the fallen combat forms. She specialized in hostile extraterrestrial biology before joining my team. Dr. Lewis approached, her gloved hands holding a sealed container of purple tissue. Captain, preliminary analysis confirms these combat forms share the same basic DNA structure as the samples we analyzed from previous labyrinth encounters. However, there are significant adaptations specific to this moon's environment and the Alliance species stationed here. Can you identify the control node? Kale asked. Lewis nodded. With access to Alliance sensor data, I believe so. The labyrinth communicates through chemical and electrical signals. If we can map the signal patterns across the entire structure, we should be able to triangulate the location of the central node. Colonel Saren made her decision. Dr. Voss, provide Dr. Lewis with full access to our research data and sensor arrays. Lieutenant Mira, inform the Guardian fleet that we are developing a strategy to neutralize the labyrinth. As the Alliance officers departed to carry out their orders, Kale turned to Saren. Colonel, what we're going to attempt will be dangerous. The labyrinth will throw everything it has at us once it realizes we're targeting the control node. Your people aren't built for this kind of fight. Saren's 4 eyes fixed on the human. Are you suggesting we leave this battle to your team alone, Captain? I'm suggesting you understand what you're volunteering for, Kale replied. We, Deathworlders, evolved to survive conditions that would kill most sentient species. Pain, toxins, radiation, extreme temperatures. These are familiar to us. Your species evolved in more forgiving environments. This mission will likely have high casualties. The Alliance does not shrink from sacrifice when necessary. Captain, Saren said firmly, we will fight alongside your team. For the first time, Kale's expression showed something akin to respect. Then we'd better start planning. The labyrinth isn't going to wait. The next 12 hours were a flurry of activity as Alliance scientists and the human team worked together to analyze the labyrinth structure. Dr. Voss and Dr. Lewis found themselves forming an unlikely partnership. The Alliance xenobiologist's theoretical knowledge complementing the humans' practical experience with hostile biological entities. Their breakthrough came during the 4th hour of analysis, when Dr. Lewis identified a pattern in the chemical signals flowing through the labyrinth. Look here. She pointed to a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional map of Sentinel Prime. The signal density increases exponentially as we approach this region in the northern hemisphere. All major commands seem to originate from this point and ripple outward. Dr. Voss studied the data, his scientific curiosity overcoming his initial prejudice against the humans. Fascinating. The pattern resembles neural activity in a centralized nervous system, but on a planetary scale. If this is indeed the control node, why has it remained stationary? It would be more logical to constantly relocate to avoid detection. Because it can't move, Kyle interjected, studying the hologram. Whatever constitutes the central intelligence of the labyrinth, it's bound to that location. Possibly it requires specific environmental conditions or access to particular resources. Or, Dr. Lewis added, it's physically too large or too complex to relocate without temporarily shutting down the entire network. That would leave it vulnerable. Colonel Saren had been listening silently. Now, she stepped forward. If we accept this theory, how do we target the control node? It appears to be located deep within the most heavily infested region of Sentinel Prime. Kale's expression was grim. We go in, a small strike team, moving fast enough to penetrate the labyrinth's defenses before it can fully respond. Impossible, Lieutenant Mira protested. The biological density in that region is too high. Our ships can't penetrate the outer layers, and ground forces would be overwhelmed within minutes. Your ships and your ground forces, yes, Kyle agreed. But we've designed our equipment specifically for this kind of environment. Our ship can deliver us directly to the surface near the control node. From there, we fight our way in. And how exactly do you plan to destroy the control node once you reach it? Dr. Voss asked. The labyrinth has demonstrated remarkable regenerative capabilities. We have weapons designed for total cellular disruption, Kyle replied. They'll work. Saren studied the tactical display, considering their options. Alliance doctrine would never approve such a high-risk mission with so little chance of success. But Alliance doctrine had consistently failed against the labyrinth. I'll lead a supporting force, she decided. My best troops will accompany your team. Captain, we'll provide cover and distraction while you target the control node. Kale shook his head. With respect, Colonel, your troops will only slow us down. We move faster alone. This is not a request, Captain. Saren's mandibles clicked firmly. Alliance forces will participate in this mission. I understand your concerns, but this is still Alliance territory, and ultimately, my responsibility. For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then, surprisingly, Kale nodded. Very well, but only your best, most physically resilient troops. And they follow my tactical commands once we're on the ground. Agreed, Saren replied. Lieutenant Mira, assemble Talon Squad, full combat loadout, and tell them to prepare for environmental conditions worse than anything they've encountered before. As Mira departed to carry out her orders, Dr. Voss approached Saren privately. Colonel, I request permission to accompany the strike team. This is an unprecedented opportunity to study the labyrinth's central intelligence up close. Denied, Doctor, Saren replied immediately. This is a combat mission, not a scientific expedition. With respect, Colonel, understanding the enemy may be as important as destroying it, Voss persisted. If we encounter similar biological threats in the future, the data I could collect would be invaluable. Saren considered this. I'll discuss it with Captain Kale. The decision will be his, as he's leading the ground operation. To her surprise, when approached, Kale readily agreed to Dr. Voss's participation. Actually, having a xenobiologist of his caliber could be useful, the human captain explained. If the control node is more complex than we anticipate, his expertise might help us identify its vulnerabilities. And so, as the 24th hour approached, the strike team assembled in the Deathworlders ship hangar. 12 humans, 10 Alliance commandos from Talon Squad, Colonel Saren, and Dr. Voss prepared for what might well be a suicide mission. The human vessel, which Kale had informed them, was named Thermopylae, after some ancient Earth battle, was cramped and utilitarian compared to Alliance ships. The interior was designed for functionality rather than comfort, with exposed conduits and manual controls that seemed laughably primitive to Alliance sensibilities. As the ship broke orbit and descended toward Sentinel Prime, Saren observed the humans' pre-battle rituals with fascination. Some checked and rechecked their weapons with meticulous care. Others engaged in what appeared to be meditative practices. Two applied colorful markings to their faces. "War paint," Lieutenant Mira whispered, having apparently researched human combat traditions. Most intriguing was Captain Kale, who stood before his assembled team and spoke words that Saren's translator rendered as poetry. Something about valleys of death and the virtue of courage. The humans responded with solemn nods or quiet affirmations, a shared cultural touchstone that transcended the barriers between their species. "We're approaching the drop zone," the ship's pilot announced. "Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds. It's going to get rough. The labyrinth has modified the atmosphere to include corrosive compounds." "Helmets sealed," Kale ordered, and his team complied instantly, enclosing their vulnerable heads in protective gear that, while still primitive by Alliance standards, appeared remarkably robust. The ship shuddered violently as it plunged through Sentinel Prime's corrupted atmosphere. Acidic rain lashed against the viewport, and biological matter scraped along the hull with a sound like claws on metal. Alliance sensors would have been blinded in these conditions, but somehow the human vessel maintained its course, descending with controlled power toward their target. "Impact in 5, the pilot called out. 4, 3, 2, 1. The ship slammed into the surface of Sentinel Prime with bone-jarring force. Before the dust had settled, the rear hatch was opening, and Captain Kale was leading his team out into the alien hell that had once been a thriving colony world. Saren followed, her environmental suit systems immediately screaming warnings about the hostile conditions. The air was thick with toxins and biological spores. The ground beneath their feet pulsed with unsettling vitality. And all around them, the biological labyrinth rose in twisted spires and throbbing nodes, a landscape of nightmares made flesh. "Stay close," Kale ordered, his voice clear through the comm system. "The control node is 2 kilometers north. We move fast. Engage only when necessary, and save our heavy ordnance for the center." The mixed team moved through the landscape of horrors with purposeful speed. The humans took point positions, their reactions seemingly faster than their Alliance counterparts. When attack came, in the form of whip-like tendrils that lashed out from concealed nodes, the Deathworlders responded with practiced precision, severing the biological weapons with bladed implements or burning them away with concentrated chemical compounds. Dr. Voss moved in the center of the formation, his scientific equipment constantly scanning and recording. "Remarkable," he murmured as they passed a particularly large growth. "The labyrinth has developed specialized structures I've never observed before. It's as if the entire organism is evolving in real time to address our presence." "It knows we're coming for the control node," Kyle replied grimly. "The closer we get, the harder it will fight to stop us." His prediction proved accurate. As they approached the 1-kilometer mark, the attacks intensified. Spore clouds erupted from rupturing pustules, forcing the team to activate specialized filters in their breathing apparatus. Pools of caustic fluid bubbled up from the ground, necessitating detours that slowed their progress. Then came the combat forms, biological constructs designed specifically for warfare. Unlike the shambling creatures they had encountered on the moon, these were sleek, purpose-built killers, with multiple limbs ending in bony blades and mouths that spewed corrosive enzymes. The first wave hit from all sides, dozens of creatures swarming from concealed burrows in the biological carpet that covered the landscape. Alliance commandos fell into defensive positions, their energy weapons carving swaths through the attacking horde. But for each creature that fell, 2 more emerged from the writhing mass. The humans, however, didn't defend. They attacked. Saren watched in astonishment as the Deathworlders charged directly into the mass of combat forms, their primitive weapons wreaking havoc at close range. They moved with a speed and coordination that belied their crude appearance, each team member covering the other's blind spots without need for verbal communication. Most shocking was their apparent immunity to injuries that would have immediately incapacitated Alliance soldiers. One human took a slash across his torso that exposed internal organs, yet continued fighting with undiminished ferocity. Another had her leg melted to the bone by acidic spittle, only to inject herself with some compound from her medical kit and keep moving, albeit with a pronounced limp. "How are they still functioning?" Dr. Voss asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear as they huddled behind a defensive position. "Endurance predators," Lieutenant Mira replied, firing her energy rifle at an approaching combat form. "I researched their biology after our first encounter. Humans evolved to pursue prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They can sustain tremendous physical trauma and continue functioning through a combination of biological redundancy and neurochemical overrides." "Fascinating," Voss murmured. "An evolutionary strategy entirely alien to Alliance species." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was in reality less than 15 minutes. When it ended, the ground was littered with the twitching remains of combat forms, and the strike team had been reduced by 3, 2 Alliance commandos, and 1 human. "We press on," Kale ordered, applying a sealing compound to a wound on his arm that would have sent an Alliance soldier into shock. "The control node is responding to our approach. The next wave will be worse." Saren moved to his side as they continued their advance. "Captain, we've lost nearly 20% of our force, and we're still half a kilometer from the target. Perhaps we should consider an alternative approach." Kale's expression was hidden behind his helmet, but his voice conveyed grim determination. "There is no alternative approach, Colonel. Either we reach the control node and destroy it, or Sentinel Prime falls, and the Labyrinth gains a foothold that will threaten the entire sector. My team knew the risks when we accepted this mission." "And what exactly is your plan once we reach the control node?" Saren pressed. "You've been deliberately vague about your method of destroying it." For a moment, Kale was silent. Then, "We've encountered similar biological constructs before. Their central intelligence is usually concentrated in a specialized structure, something analogous to a brain. Once we identify it, we'll deploy targeted nanodisruptors that will destroy its cellular cohesion at the molecular level. Such technology is prohibited under Alliance conventions," Dr. Voss interjected, having overheard their conversation. "Which is why we're not Alliance," Kale replied simply. "We do what's necessary to survive. It's how we've always lived." Before Saren could respond, the ground beneath them heaved violently. Massive tendrils, thick as Alliance cruisers, erupted from the biological carpet, forming a writhing barrier across their path. "It's trying to block our approach," Dr. Lewis called out, her sensors aimed at the biological wall. "These structures are channeling massive amounts of energy. They're drawing resources from the entire labyrinth to prevent us from reaching the control node." "Then we're on the right track," Kale replied. He turned to his demolition specialist. "Harrison, create an opening." The burly human nodded and stepped forward, placing what looked like primitive explosive devices at the base of the biological wall. As he worked, more combat forms emerged from the pulsating landscape, these larger and more heavily armored than before. "Defensive positions," Saren ordered, and the remaining Alliance commandos formed a perimeter around Harrison and the other humans working on the barrier. The ensuing battle was even more brutal than the first. The combat forms had adapted to the team's weapons and tactics, developing thicker armor and redundant nervous systems that made them harder to kill. 3 more Alliance commandos fell, their environmental suits breached by the creature's increasingly specialized weapons. But the humans continued to adapt as well. When their projectile weapons proved less effective against the reinforced combat forms, They switched to thermal lances that burned through the biological armor, regardless of its thickness. When acidic compounds began to corrode their protective gear, they applied neutralizing agents from their medical kits. "Charges set!" Harrison called out, sprinting back from the biological wall. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion was deafening, even through the team's protective helmets. The biological wall shuddered, massive chunks of tissue raining down as a jagged hole appeared in its structure. "Move! Now!" Kale ordered, and the strike team charged through the opening before the labyrinth could regenerate the barrier. Beyond the wall, the landscape changed dramatically. Instead of the chaotic, seemingly random growth that had characterized the labyrinth thus far, the biological structures here displayed eerie symmetry and purpose. Pulsating vessels carried fluids in clearly defined patterns. Specialized nodules emitted precisely timed electrical discharges. Everything converged toward a central structure that rose like a twisted cathedral from the biological mass. "The control node," Dr. Lewis confirmed, her sensors aimed at the structure. "Energy readings are off the charts. This is definitely the central intelligence of the labyrinth." Dr. Voss moved to her side, his own equipment scanning the bizarre construction. "Incredible. The architecture resembles neural pathways, but on a macro scale. It's as if the entire structure is one massive brain." "Less admiration, more planning," Kale cut in. "We need to reach the central chamber of that structure and deploy the nanodisruptors directly into the core intelligence." "Captain," one of the other humans called out, pointing toward the base of the structure. "Look." A figure had emerged from the cathedral-like building. At first glance, it appeared almost humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head-like structure. But as it moved closer, its true nature became apparent. It was a construct of the labyrinth, a specialized form unlike any they had encountered before. Its body was composed of intricately woven biological fibers, constantly shifting and reforming. Where a face should have been was a pulsating mass of sensory organs, ranging from compound eyes, similar to Dr. Voss's, to structures that resembled no known sensory apparatus in the Alliance database. Most disturbing was its movement, graceful, purposeful, intelligent. "The biological witch," Lieutenant Mira whispered, using the term Alliance soldiers had coined for the mythical central intelligence of the labyrinth. The creature stopped a dozen meters from the strike team. For a moment, it simply observed them, its alien senses clearly assessing the threat they posed. Then, to everyone's shock, it spoke, not with a voice, but through modulated vibrations in the air that their translators somehow rendered into comprehensible language. "You seek to destroy what you cannot understand." The vibrations formed words in their minds. "We are evolution manifest, adaptation personified. You cannot stop the inevitable." "It's communicating," Dr. Voss exclaimed, his scientific equipment recording frantically. "This is unprecedented." "It's stalling," Kale replied coldly, his weapon raised. "Trying to buy time while the labyrinth prepares its next attack. Your species are biological dead ends," the creature continued, its body rippling with what might have been emotion. "Evolved for static environments, incapable of true adaptation. We offer transcendence, incorporation into a greater whole." "We've heard this speech before," Kyle said, stepping forward. "Different words, same meaning, surrender or die. Become part of us or be consumed by us." "You are different," the creature's attention focused on the humans. "Your biology, fascinating, primitive yet resilient. You have potential. Join us willingly, and your genetic gifts will elevate our collective." "Not interested," Kale replied. Then, without warning, he fired his weapon, a concentrated burst of what appeared to be superheated plasma that struck the creature squarely in its central mass. The biological construct recoiled, its form temporarily destabilized by the attack. But it recovered with alarming speed, its body reconstructing the damaged tissue, even as they watched. Crude, it vibrated, the translation carrying a note of what might have been amusement. As expected from such primitive beings, now witnessed true evolution. The creature's form suddenly expanded, tendrils erupting from its body to lash out at the strike team. At the same time, the ground beneath their feet heaved, specialized combat forms bursting forth to attack from below. "Defensive positions!" Saren ordered. But it was already too late. The combined attack had scattered the team, isolating them from one another as the labyrinth's forces closed in. 3 more Alliance commandos fell in the initial onslaught, their environmental suits breached by precisely targeted strikes. 2 humans went down as well, though one continued fighting despite injuries that should have been immediately fatal. Saren found herself back-to-back with Dr. Voss, both firing desperately at the encroaching combat forms. "We can't hold this position," she shouted into her comm. "Captain Kale, we need to regroup." There was no response. Through the chaos of battle, Saren caught glimpses of Kale and his remaining team members, forcing their way toward the central structure, leaving the Alliance forces to fend for themselves. "They're abandoning us," Dr. Voss hissed, his usual scientific detachment replaced by survival instinct. "No," Lieutenant Mira replied, appearing beside them with her energy rifle blazing. "They're completing the mission. We're the distraction." Understanding dawned on Saren. Of course. The biological witch is focused on us because we pose the immediate threat. Meanwhile, Kale's team can penetrate the central structure. "A sound tactical decision," Mira acknowledged, "though I doubt our chances of survival." "Then we make our deaths count," Saren decided. "All remaining Alliance forces, concentrate fire on the biological witch. Draw its attention at all costs." The surviving Alliance commandos responded immediately, redirecting their attacks toward the central construct. The creature reacted as expected, focusing its defensive efforts on the most immediate threat, while Kyle and his team slipped into the cathedral-like structure behind it. The battle intensified. The biological witch proved capable of coordinating dozens of combat forms simultaneously, while defending itself with layers of rapidly regenerating tissue. Each time, the Alliance forces seemed to damage it significantly. It adapted, developing new defenses specific to their weapons. "It's learning too quickly," Dr. Voss shouted over the comm. "Our weapons will be completely ineffective within minutes." "Then we change tactics," Saren replied. "Lieutenant Mira, your plasma grenade." Mira understood immediately. She unhooked a specialized weapon from her belt, an experimental device that generated a miniature sun-hot plasma field, designed to sterilize large areas of biological contamination. It was a weapon of last resort, with a blast radius that would likely catch the Alliance forces in its effect. "On my mark," Saren ordered, positioning herself to create maximum distance between the surviving Alliance personnel and the biological witch. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Mira hurled the device directly at the creature. It detonated in a blinding flash of superheated plasma that engulfed the biological witch and a dozen surrounding combat forms. The heat was so intense that Saren's environmental suit's cooling systems immediately overloaded, leaving her gasping in rapidly rising temperatures. When the plasma field dissipated, a blackened crater remained where the biological witch had stood. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield, as both the Alliance forces and the labyrinth's combat forms seemed to process the sudden destruction of the central intelligence. Then, impossibly, movement stirred in the center of the crater. From the charred biological matter, a new form began to take shape, smaller, more compact, but recognizably the same entity. "Impossible," Dr. Voss breathed, his scientific equipment scanning frantically. "It shouldn't be able to regenerate from that level of cellular disruption." "As I said." The creature's vibrations returned, weaker but still intelligible. "Evolution manifest. You cannot destroy what can adapt to any assault." Before Saren could order another attack, The ground beneath the cathedral-like structure trembled violently. Explosions erupted from within, sending chunks of biological matter raining down across the battlefield. The entire construct seemed to shudder, sections collapsing inward as some internal force tore through its carefully organized systems. The biological witch froze, its partially regenerated form suddenly rigid. No! Its vibrations carried genuine emotion for the first time, fear. The core. You cannot. Its form dissolved into unstructured biological matter as the cathedral behind it continued to collapse. Throughout the battlefield, the combat forms suddenly lost cohesion, their coordinated attacks degenerating into random, spasmodic movements before they too dissolved into puddles of inert biological fluid. They did it, Lieutenant Mira realized, lowering her weapon. Captain Kale reached the central core. Saren activated her comm system. Captain Kale, report. What's your status? Static filled the channel for several seconds before a response came through. Distorted, but recognizable as Kale's voice. Core neutralized. Nano-disruptors deployed directly into the primary neural cluster. The entire labyrinth should be breaking down within minutes. Casualties? Saren asked, already moving toward the collapsing structure with the surviving Alliance forces. Heavy, Kale replied grimly. Only 3 of us made it to the core chamber. Harrison and Lewis didn't make it out. Saren felt a pang of regret for the humans she had initially dismissed as primitive. Whatever their technological level, their courage and sacrifice had saved Sentinel Prime, and possibly the entire sector. We're coming to you, she said. Hold position. By the time the Alliance forces reached the remains of the cathedral, the entire biological landscape was in full retreat. The pulsating tissue that had covered the surface was shrinking, withering, like plants deprived of water. The specialized structures that had processed nutrients and channeled energy were collapsing in on themselves, their purpose lost with the destruction of the central intelligence. They found Captain Kale and his 2 surviving team members in what had once been the central chamber of the structure. The humans were injured, one severely, but still functioning. Around them lay the remains of what appeared to be a massive neural cluster, its intricate connections now dissolved into inert biological matter. Fascinating, Dr. Voss murmured, immediately scanning the remains. The entire labyrinth was controlled from this single neural network, a distributed consciousness with a centralized processing hub. Similar to Earth's fungal networks, Kyle explained, applying medical compounds to his teammates' wounds. Vast systems connected by mycelium, capable of transmitting information across enormous distances. But unlike Earth's fungi, this had true intelligence and a drive to consume. You've seen this before? Saren asked, helping to stabilize the injured human. Not exactly this, Kale admitted. But similar enough that we recognize the pattern. Earth has produced countless predatory organisms during its evolution. Some hunt with teeth and claws. Others hunt by assimilation, incorporating their prey's genetic material into their own. The labyrinth is just a more advanced version of the latter. Dr. Voss looked up from his scans, his scientific curiosity overpowering his exhaustion. Captain, the nano-disruptors you deployed, they seem to have not just destroyed the neural network, but rendered the entire biological mass inert. How is that possible? The disruptors target specific cellular structures essential for the labyrinth's distributed communication, Kale explained. Without those structures, the individual components can't coordinate. It's like severing every nerve in a body simultaneously. The organism doesn't just die, it disintegrates. Such technology could revolutionize our fight against the labyrinth on other worlds, Voss said eagerly. That's why we brought it, Kale replied. Your council asked for reinforcements. We brought what was needed. As they made their way back to the extraction point, Saren observed the rapidly decaying landscape around them. Already, large sections of Sentinel Prime's surface were returning to their original state, the biological carpet receding to reveal the colony's infrastructure beneath, damaged but not destroyed. Sentinel Prime can be reclaimed, she said, more to herself than to the others. It will take time, but the colony can be rebuilt. And fortified, Kale added. The labyrinth may be defeated here, but there are more out there. This was just one tendril of a larger organism. Lieutenant Mira, who had been coordinating with the orbiting Alliance fleet, approached with news. Colonel, the Guardian fleet reports that the labyrinth constructs in orbit are disintegrating. Admiral Vex is requesting permission to begin recovery operations on the surface. Granted, Saren replied, and inform the Council that the operation was a success, thanks to the unconventional reinforcements they sent. As the Alliance shuttle descended to extract the surviving team members, Saren found herself standing beside Captain Kale, both looking out over the landscape of Sentinel Prime. The human's environmental suit was torn in several places, revealing glimpses of the wounded flesh beneath. Yet he stood straight, showing no sign of the pain he must be feeling. Your people fought well, Kyle said unexpectedly. The Alliance soldiers. They didn't break when the biological witch attacked. As did yours, Saren acknowledged. The Alliance owes you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. Kale turned to face her, removing his helmet to reveal features that Saren now found less alien than she had initially. There's a saying on Earth, Colonel. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The labyrinth threatens all sentient life, not just the Alliance. Today we fought together. Perhaps that's the beginning of something more. As the shuttle touched down and the survivors began to board, Dr. Voss approached Kale with barely contained scientific excitement. Captain, with your permission, I would like to propose an exchange of knowledge between our peoples. Your understanding of biological warfare and adaptation strategies could be invaluable to Alliance research. And your technological capabilities could help us develop better defenses, Kyle replied. I think that can be arranged, Doctor. Aboard the shuttle, as it ascended from the surface of Sentinel Prime, Colonel Saren found herself reconsidering her initial assessment of the Deathworlders. She had dismissed them as primitive, barely civilized creatures whose only value lay in their physical resilience. Now she understood that their apparent primitiveness masked a different kind of sophistication, one born of surviving on a world that had shaped them through countless generations of evolutionary pressure. They had endured trials that Alliance species had never faced, developed adaptations and strategies that Alliance military doctrine had never considered, and in doing so, they had become exactly what the Alliance needed in its darkest hour: warriors born of a death world, forged in the crucible of endless survival. Lieutenant Mira, Saren said quietly, as the shuttle docked with the luminous Aegis. Prepare a secure communication channel to the Council. I need to discuss the formation of a new defense initiative. Ma'am, Mira inquired. Saren's gaze drifted to where Captain Kale sat, with his surviving team members, already planning their next mission. The Deathworlder Integration Program. I believe it's time we sought out other species who evolved on Class 12 worlds. This war may depend on it. As Sentinel Prime receded into the distance, its surface already beginning to heal from the labyrinth's infestation, Saren couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The Alliance had asked for reinforcements, expecting more of the same: more ships, more troops, more conventional weapons. What they had received instead were beings from a world so hostile that most Alliance species would consider it uninhabitable. Deathworlders. The term had once been spoken with disdain or fear. Now, perhaps, it would be spoken with hope. For in the endless void of space, as ancient biological horrors threatened to consume all sentient life, humanity's greatest weakness had proven to be its greatest strength, the brutal crucible of Earth that had forged them into survivors above all else. They had asked for reinforcements. What they got were Deathworlders, and the galaxy would never be the same.